Welcome to Confronting Religious Extremism in Medicine and Science, the First Amendment, and the Fight for Facts. We are really thrilled to have you all here today. Today's program is part of Jews for a Secular Democracy's Jewish Women and Religious Freedom in Pittsburgh project, which is proudly sponsored by the Jewish Women's Foundation of Greater Pittsburgh, underwritten in part by Trustee Nancy Weissman in memory of her beloved mother-in-law, Trustee Jacqueline Wexler. We really want to thank Nancy and the Jewish Women's Foundation for their ongoing and frankly critical support. We also want to thank today's program co-sponsors, NCJW Pittsburgh, Red Wine and Blue Pennsylvania, Temple Israel Greater Orlando, Congregation Beth Adam of South Florida, the Society for Humanistic Judaism, NCJW Miami, Or Adam Congregation of Phoenix, and the Rabbi Joseph H. Gumbiner Community Action Project, a program of the Tucson Jewish Museum and Holocaust Center right here in Tucson, where I'm from. Thank you all to those co-sponsors and to everyone across the country for joining us. During today's program, we are going to have the chat turned on, but we are going to kindly ask that you stick to the issues at hand and try to keep the chat to a minimum. If you have questions for the panelists, please put it in the Q&A section. Lastly, before we get started, in an effort to strengthen our programming, we are asking all of you to complete a post-webinar survey. I'm going to put the survey in the chat later on during the event, probably multiple times. It is short and sweet and will only take you 30, maybe 60 seconds to complete, but will really help us immensely in our future planning. So please complete that for us. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce our amazing and energetic and dynamo Pittsburgh organizer, Alliyson Feldmann, who will be moderating tonight's conversation. Take it away, Alliyson.
Thank you so much, Katie, and thank you all of you for being here. Good evening. Welcome, everyone. I'm so glad you could join us for tonight's program, Confronting Religious Extremism in Medicine and Science, the First Amendment, and the Fight for Facts. As Jewish women, we here in the greater Pittsburgh area and across the country, we know how important our values of justice, community, and truth are. Our tradition teaches that knowledge and science are not in conflict with faith. They are essential to life and to progress. Yet today, extreme religious ideology is being used to attack science, restrict healthcare, and undermine democracy itself. We are here to affirm something critical. Freedom of religion also means freedom from religion in government. No one's private faith should decide another person's health, their rights, or their access to medical care. Tonight, we'll explore how anti-science movements rooted in religious extremism are harmful to women and girls, LGBTQA+ people, and marginalized communities. And we'll talk about the connection between anti-science and anti-Semitism. We'll also hear how science is being defended right here in Pittsburgh and across our nation, and what each of us can do to protect truth, freedom, and our own health. I am beyond honored to introduce tonight's panelists. Dr. Peter Hotez, a physician scientist, vaccine researcher, author, and leading voice against disinformation. He is a professor of pediatrics and molecular virology and microbiology at Baylor College of Medicine, where he is also co-director of the Texas Children's Hospital Center for Vaccine Development and dean of the National School of Tropical Medicine. Dr. Hotez is also university professor of biology at Baylor University. Dr. Hotez is a vaccine scientist, biochemist, and pediatrician who has led or co-led the development of numerous vaccines for parasitic infections. There are some that are currently available and some currently in clinical trials, and several coronavirus vaccines, including 2 low-cost COVID vaccines for global health, so far administered to 100 million children and adults in India and Indonesia. It makes me tear up because I remember being so afraid. So thank you for being part of the people that saved us.
Thank you.
He is also an ardent vaccine advocate and science explainer who combats anti-Semitism and anti-science in America and globally. Professor Hotez has authored 4 single-authored books with Johns Hopkins University Press, including Vaccine Did Not Cause Rachel's Autism, and as a mom of 2 children with autism, thank you. Preventing the Next Pandemic and the Deadly Rise of Anti-Science, and the just released book, which is in my Amazon cart now, Science Under Siege, How to Fight the 5 Most Powerful Forces That Threaten Our World, co-authored with climate scientist Michael Mann. Kudos. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be in your presence.
It just came out a few days ago.
I was on the wait. And then my neighbor, dear friend, and someone who edifies me on a weekly basis, Dr. DJ Kleinbaum, co-founder of Emerald Cloud Lab, the world's first and largest cloud laboratory. Prior to funding Emerald Cloud Lab, Dr. Kleinbaum co-founded Emerald Therapeutics, which focused on developing a novel antiviral nanotechnology to detect and instruct the apoptosis of infected cells. Dr. Kleinbaum holds a Ph.D. in chemistry from Stanford University, where he studied, oh, help me out, DJ. Dr. Kleinbaum, nucleic acid.
Nucleic acid.
Nucleic, thank you, acid chemistry, under the direction of Professor Eric Kuhl. He also holds an undergraduate degree in biological sciences with concentrations in
Computational biology and
biology. I feel like I'm learning as I go. And biochemistry from Carnegie Mellon University, and serves on the advisory board of the university's Schwartz Center for Entrepreneurship. Welcome to both of you. Thank you so much for being here. Together, you're going to help us understand the threats, the stakes, and the actions we can take to defend science, democracy, and equality. So thank you. We're going to start off with a joint question to both of you, and if Dr. Hotez, you could answer first. So my first question for both of you is, religious extremism has fueled misinformation about vaccines, reproductive health, and even gender-affirming care. We're seeing this right now with UPMC in Pittsburgh. How do you see these anti-science narratives shaping public policy? And why is that such a threat to evidence-based medicine and to our very democracy? Dr. Hotez.
Well, thank you. I don't get involved much in transgender care and some of the reproductive health much, but very much around vaccines, and that's how I got involved in this. I didn't start out that way. If you don't mind, I'll give you I'll try to keep it brief, but just give you a couple of minutes so you can understand where I'm coming from. I grew up in West Hartford, Connecticut. I'm Jewish, and my wife's Jewish, and actually I'm a relative of Phil Lazowski, a Holocaust survivor who's a rabbi in Bloomfield, who's well known for being one of the Jews in the forest, protected by partisans. And there's actually a book. He's a revered cousin, still alive at 98. And quite honestly, other than being bar mitzvah, it was not, I didn't really think a lot about religion. It was not, I was very focused on being in the laboratory, being a scientist. And so after I was at Yale as an undergraduate, and then I did my MD and PhD in New York, where I met Ann at Rockefeller University and Weill Cornell Medical College. Used to be the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research in the Upper East Side. Ann and I lived there for $44 a month in the 1980s. Those were better days. And that's what I wanted to do. For my dissertation, for my MD PhD dissertation, we worked on, I got permission to be a lone person on a project to work on a hookworm anemia vaccine. And now 40 years later, it's showing protection in clinical trials, which is about the time frame for a lot of these vaccines. And then along the way, we started working on coronavirus vaccines for SARS and MERS. Those were the original coronavirus vaccines, so that when the COVID-19 sequence came online in bioRxiv in 2020, we were able to pivot our program, make a low-cost COVID vaccine that reached 100 million people. The Indonesia one actually became the first halal COVID vaccine because we use a vegan process. So that was something else that was unexpected. So that was the plan. That's what I wanted to do. then the unplanned part came, and the unplanned part was having 4 adult kids, including Rachel, who has autism and intellectual disability. And if you remember, the initial assertion against vaccines were false claims that vaccines cause autism. And I'll never forget it. I was in my office, and the phone rings, and my assistant took a note, and she comes into my office reading it. She says, "Hey, Dr. Hotez, there's two gentlemen on the phone. One is named Dr. Anthony Fauci, and the other one is named Dr. Francis Collins. Can you speak with them?" And yeah, sure, I can speak to them. And I said, "Okay, Peter, we got a job for you. You're a vaccine scientist, a pediatrician. You have a daughter with autism. You can explain why vaccines don't cause autism, and we're going to have you talk to Bobby Kennedy." I called him Bobby, and we'll have it brokered by a third individual. And so I had a year of phone calls with him, and we can go into more detail if you like. But the bottom line, he was dug in and not interested in the science. But the product of those discussions for a year led me to write one of the books that you mentioned, Vaccines Did Not Cause Rachel's Autism. And that wound up making me public enemy number 1 or 2 with anti-vaccine groups. And that's how I got involved. And now I realize that, as great as the vaccines are that we're making in our laboratory, it's not sufficient, because the aggression against vaccines and vaccine scientists is so intense that how we go up combating that may be almost as important as the vaccines that we make. So I speak out, and it takes you to a very dark and scary place. So you're probably saying, okay, well, how does that get you to anti-Semitism? Well, what happened was, starting early on in the pandemic, I don't keep it a secret that I'm Jewish and identify as Jewish. Then the attacks of an anti-Semitic nature started popping up on emails and on social media platforms, especially Twitter, now X, and then even physical stalkings. I was even stalked in Shul when I was invited to speak at one of the Reform synagogues in Houston. So it got very dark, and it was all about that. I must be involved in a secret cabal with George Soros or the Rothschilds, and
Right. All the
and
things we hear.
making
Yeah.
making vaccines or viruses at Davos, the World Economic Forum. I hadn't even been invited to Davos, and then I started getting swastikas sent to my home in the mail, and it was a daily occurrence now where I was experiencing anti-Semitism. Growing up in West Hartford, Connecticut, which is a very Jewish community, that was never a thing. And even in Texas, I've been here 15 years. It was never a thing. And now it, was really becoming very, very troubling and very worrisome. So I looked into the history of it and realized there's a history. And for instance, well, maybe I'll stop there, and I can tell you, as when we go into the weeds about what are those links between anti-science and anti-Semitism. But anyway,
Thank you.
that's how I got involved. Not an expert necessarily on a lot of the issues we're going to talk today, but kind of being a reluctantly drawn into it. And basically, just like, I felt talking about why vaccines don't cause autism, no one was speaking out. And I thought, well, if I don't say something, here I'm a vaccine scientist and pediatrician and parent of an adult daughter with autism. If I don't say something, who does? And it's the same thing with the anti-Semitism, even though it takes you to a very scary place. So that's kind of the 30,000-foot aerial view.
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate it. And I think it's so interesting. I didn't realize that you had a direct connection to, um, I can't think of, I'm going to call him Mr. Kennedy because I feel like that's the easiest thing to say. And that you've kind of seen behind that curtain of what's driving him and how long he's been at this, because I think that that's an important piece that people who are maybe new to politics or new to paying attention to the current government and administration is that this has been a long charging train.
Yeah, it's
It's
been
just
20 years.
gotten into the
He
station.
wrote an article in Rolling Stone magazine in 2005, simultaneously published in Salon, claiming thimerosal preservative causes autism, and it was
Right.
retracted. But that's how long he's been in this.
Right, right. Thank you. DJ, I'm going to repeat the question and state it to you. Sorry, Dr. Kleinbaum, I'm too familiar. Religious extremism has fueled misinformation about vaccines, reproductive health, and even gender-affirming care. How do we see these anti-science narratives shaping public policy? And why is that such a threat to evidence-based medicine and to our very democracy?
First of all, DJ is fine.
And
I think,
Peter's fun, by the way.
Yeah. And I think, to your question, I think the challenging thing about these anti-science narratives, whether they're driven by religious ideology or otherwise, is that the decision becomes, you're just making the decision on the basis of that ideology, which, depending on who's sitting in that seat, is relatively arbitrary, rather than our history as a country of making these types of public policy and public health decisions on the basis of data and evidence-based medicine.
Mhm.
And that leads to a very dark place, because democracy in general only works when there is trust in the system. So if people stop trusting the elected officials or the people who are appointed and confirmed by those elected officials, then what reason do they have to trust the institutions under whose auspices those officials work? So this actually is is one step in what can be a very steep and very slippery slope toward just a loss of faith in government in general. And like that way lies madness. And so I think that this is a critical time, because it's not just about public policy and about public health. It's about the larger narrative that people have about the government and the elected officials who serve that government.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, could I comment on what DJ said? Because I think,
Yes.
he made a really important point. Thank you, DJ, that, there's a comment in our quote in our book that by Maxim Gorky that says, without science, democracy is impossible. Now that's not intuitively obvious, but when I started getting attacked, and my co-author in the book, Michael Mann, is a climate scientist at Penn, similarly attacked years before, your first thing you say is, what the heck is going on here? What's the political motivation here? And when you look, and it's complicated, but when you look back to the 1930s, and look at Stalinist Russia,
Mhm.
this was part of the playbook. He specifically targeted, well, of course, the intelligentsia in general, but especially scientists. So he was really headed out for a man named Nikolai Vavilov, who was one of the premier geneticists of his time, working on plant genetics to improve the Russian wheat crop. And he wound up throwing him into the Gulag, where he ultimately perished from exposure and starvation in the Gulag hospital. And he did it for the benefit of someone who had no scientific training, a man named Trofim Lysenko, who used to claim that he could soak the Russian wheat crop in snow and toughen it up for the winter. It was the ivermectin of his day, or the hydroxychloroquine of his day, and it was all nonsense. And yet, this was what was promoted then in the Soviet scientific academies. And even though it caused the Russian wheat crop to fail, and maybe millions of people in Ukraine and elsewhere in the USSR perished because of it, it was a way to exert control. And he did the same thing with going after uh, um, the theory of relativity. And then in Weimar Germany, it was something similar but different, in that there was a big, during the Weimar Republic, a big attack on Einstein. So the theory of relativity was called the Jewish fraud, and partly because it wasn't as easily verifiable, but also, it was in contradistinction to the more muscular, what they called Aryan physics of its day, experimental physics, who said that's the real physics. So, Einstein. So this is where you started to see the anti-Semitism start to pair up with the anti-science, and of course Freud was treated the same way. Psychoanalysis was another kind of Jewish fraud or Jewish science. It was different science, and both of them had to be rescued under darkness and in order to escape to the UK. So there is that very much authoritarian link to targeting science and scientists, and unfortunately, I think this is what's playing out now, both against the climate scientists and the biomedical scientists. And it's not enough just to target the science, it's kind of vilifying the individuals. People like myself were
Right.
being portrayed as public enemies or as cartoon villains, and all you got to do is look at my social media feed. It's a horror show, in addition to all the anti-Semitism. So that's what's going on here. It's a deliberate attack on expertise, science, and the scientists. When is something that I always like to say, we're a nation built on the strength of our great research universities and institutions.
Right.
So it's so self-defeating.
I think, Dr. Hotez, that goes into my first question just for you, and I'm going to adapt that because I think where you're going, it gives us a nice transition into, could you explain the connection of how of that democracy with science, and while attacking science specifically as part of that undermining and controlling and move towards authoritarianism, but why the populations they pick that will be so initially harmed. So like the harm to the mother, blaming the mother for the cause of autism, and taking away vaccines that are going to be detrimental to our children. Why are they cherry picking things that are clearly targeted at women, children, and marginalized communities?
Yeah, no, it's and it's not only marginalized communities, but one of the things that we observed. I'm sorry if I don't move around enough. The office lights say I'm not here, so that's why you're seeing me. And it's not my ADHD. I'm just trying to move around to get the lights back on. But a couple of things on that. It started. This big push against vaccines really accelerated at and this is hard to talk about because I'm sure DJ feels the same way. Our training was you don't talk about politics, right? We're not supposed to care about Republicans and Democrats and liberals or conservatives. And to be honest, I don't. I think that's your right as an American citizen. But once you started to see, and I'll get to the autism part next, but first let me just say this: it really accelerated during the beginning of the Delta wave of
Mhm.
COVID in the summer of 2021, where in their zeal to push back against vaccine mandates on Fox News and the CPAC conference, they brought on all these toxic anti-vaccine activists to falsely
Mhm.
discredit the effectiveness and safety of vaccines. So they went that next measure. So, it started out the CPAC conference of conservatives in Dallas in 2021. Representative Matthew Cawthorn, said from North Carolina, said, well, first they're going to vaccinate you, and then they're going to take away your guns and your Bibles and that kind of stuff.
Right.
And you roll your eyes, and it's I don't agree with it. It's offensive, but I sort of understood it. The problem was then they brought on all the toxic anti-vaccine activists to tell
Mhm.
people that the vaccines didn't work or weren't safe. Then Fox News piled on, and Tucker Carlson, Laura Ingraham, Sean Hannity, and we document the number of times this happened. Again, in their zeal to push back against vaccine mandates, went the next step and falsely discredited the effectiveness and safety of vaccines.
Mhm.
And so it became a thing. To tie your identity to the MAGA movement meant that you had to adopt attacks on vaccines and vaccine scientists. And in my state of Texas, we had lost 100,000 people to COVID in my state of Texas, and of those, about half were needless deaths because they were
Mhm.
occurred among people who refused vaccines after vaccines became widely available, and 200,000 Americans overall needlessly perished, and overwhelmingly in red states. And people like Charles Gaba, the health analyst, found that the redder the county, meaning the higher percentage of Republican voters, the lower the immunization rate and higher the death rate. So much so that David Leonhardt of the New York Times just called it red COVID, and red being Republican, blue being Democrat. So what do you do? I mean, how do you now say don't do this? How do you
Right.
uncouple it? The other thing that happened, and it was so the original assertion was vaccines cause autism, then this kind of libertarian concept of health freedom, medical freedom, that falsely discredited the vaccines. Then the third converging thread, then I'll stop, was a very lucrative health and wellness and influencer industry.
Mhm.
which is all built on whatever they can buy up in bulk and
Yep.
then repackage and sell it with telehealth visits and bilk
Mhm.
customers out of thousands of dollars. So, yeah.
And I would
Have you
even
ever
add
wondered why
that
are they always anti-parasitic drugs? Hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin, fenbendazole, because they're cheap and you can buy them
yeah.
generically. You can buy a bucket of it, you repackage it and sell it with a telehealth visit. But the business model for their success was not just selling the snake oil. They had to discredit the mainstream science, and they
Mhm.
had to, again, portray the scientists as enemies. So there was both a political motivation and a financial motivation. And then we could talk about now after this, after DJ, what Bobby's doing to bring in now the autism stuff back into this.
Thank you. And I think too, they can, now that they have all of these great social media connections, even on someone's algorithm that, who I am as a human being would have never showed me these things. And the algorithm just is, I mean, every other video right now, it's someone who's clearly anti-science, antiviral is showing up on my For You pages. So they have a well-oiled machine. Dr. Kleinbaum, I am going to kind of ask you a two-part question. So first is also like, what is that connection? What is the purpose and what is to be gained by targeting women and children specifically? And also speak to us as Pittsburghers, our proud tradition of science. I mean, the polio vaccine was developed here, breakthrough Alzheimer's research, regenerative medicine, and AI diagnostics, which I know you're passionate about. Yet these advances have all been at risk and undermined by this ideology currently. Why should people in Pittsburgh specifically be caring about our loss of research, and how do we protect this from what's going on?
Yeah, so I'll take the Pittsburgh part first because I think it's really, I mean, how soon we forget.
Mhm.
Pittsburgh, has been and continues to be sort of a shining light of a city revitalized that went through a horrific economic downturn when steel left in the 70s. And what's the thing that sets Pittsburgh apart that brought the city back? Eds and meds, right?
Mhm.
Education and the medical sciences and the medical community. And so you don't have to care if you live in Pittsburgh and you don't have to care about protecting research. How about like caring about your local economy? Depending on what study you look at, the numbers differ, but the estimates are all north of $10 billion annually in regional economic impact that research and medical science bring to this area, not to mention literally tens of thousands of jobs. So if you care about, you don't have to care about scientific research or medical research. If you care about the economy of Pittsburgh and southwestern Pennsylvania in general, then you need to care about protecting research because that is what has kept this city afloat through some pretty horrible economic times that has really set back other similar cities that such that they have not recovered from yet. And still is sort of the ballast that sort of holds this region up.
Mhm.
So
And by the
that was
way,
your yeah.
I was honored last year at the University of Pittsburgh with a prize for public health, and it was given to me by Peter Salk, the son of Jonas Salk, and that was really very special for me because Jonas Salk was one of my heroes. But as you say, I mean, Pittsburgh is a powerhouse. I mean, what's going on at UPMC is just extraordinary, and it's not just UPMC; it's the undergraduate side and that incredible Cathedral of Learning, which is such an inspiring place. And then you walk a few more blocks and say, "What's that?" And then you realize that's Carnegie Mellon right next to it. It is
Mhm.
it is just extraordinary. And you're right. This is, but Pittsburgh is not alone. I mean, look at Cleveland, and the Cleveland
Yeah.
Clinic and Case Western, Houston, and the Texas Medical Center. This is what makes our nation a great nation, and to see it torn down for grifting and a very corrupt health and wellness and corrupt industry is really troubling, and that we would seek to dismantle all of the things that make our nation so wonderful.
Yes. And I think as a woman specifically who's worked a lot in the reproductive healthcare world, the to me the attacks are all connected, right? So they want to blame me for my children's diagnosis. They want to blame me for how I handled my pregnancy. They want to take away my ability to choose what I do with my body. And now they're taking away my ability of what I put in my body to protect me and my children. So is there a reason that you can see scientifically or from your research that we would be, women specifically would be, who's being targeted by some
Well,
of
it's
yeah,
all about it's all about disease is your fault because you didn't go to the gym enough and you didn't have the right diet. It's all from the well and buy their supplements and snake oil and sugar
right,
pills labeled with God knows what. And that's what it is. You know, the health and wellness and influencer industry is a $500 billion industry by some estimates. Still less than the pharma companies, but getting up there. And so this is why we're seeing the attacks because it is an effort to promote the wellness and influencer industry at the expense of biomedical science. That's where the cuts to the NIH grants happened. That's why when we had our terrible measles epidemic in West
mhm,
Texas, you know, Kennedy comes out and says, well, you can either get the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine, which of course is what you should do, or you can get this cocktail of supplements, vitamin A, budesonide,
right.
clarithromycin. You're saying, where the heck did that come from? And then you realize it's from the health and wellness industry. So he's now changed his rhetoric to adapt to the health and wellness and influencer industry. And then this gets back to autism, that autism, you know, the way, I mean, you remember the language he was using a couple of months back describing
Right.
people on the autism spectrum, right? He said, you know, they can't use the toilet, they'll never pay
Focus.
taxes, they'll
Right.
never, they don't contribute to society. And then he wants to create a registry of those
Oh, that was
individuals towards what
terrifying.
purpose? And I
Mhm.
said, oh my God. I mean, you know, Rachel, my adult daughter with autism and intellectual disabilities has a verbal IQ in the 80 to 90 range, a functional IQ in the 40 range. So she can't live independently, but she walks to Goodwill Industries every day. She loves it. She earns a paycheck that she's proud of,
Mhm.
and she has friends and goes to the movies. She's got a very interesting and full life. Now it requires some assistance, but you know, the way he does it, so his narrative is that these are otherwise well kids, and then all of a sudden they became autistic, presumably because they got a vaccine or some other and it
Right. Or the mother took
denies
Tylenol now.
and it denies the role of autism genes.
Hmm.
We have at least 100 autism genes identified. We did genomic sequencing on Rachel, and my wife Ann and I found Rachel's autism gene linked to a neuronal connection. But I remember having that discussion with him, and I said, Bobby, it's not that there's no environmental role because he came out and he was saying, well, the scientific community denies any environmental triggers for autism. And they're saying it's all due to shifting diagnostic criteria. I said, no, Bobby, we had that conversation. Yes, I think shifting diagnostic criteria is a big part of it, but I detailed for him half a dozen chemical exposures in early pregnancy that can interact with autism genes and cause an autism phenotype. So, for instance, if you're pregnant and not aware of it and on an anti-seizure medication called Depakote or valproic acid, it'll increase the likelihood your child's going to be born with and eventually show evidence of autism because it's interacting with the autism genes. And I said, and I remember having that conversation with him years ago. I said, Bobby, this is your moment, man. You're an environmental attorney.
Right.
This you should be all over this. Why are you focusing on vaccines? That's not even having any plausibility when you can actually do some good and start looking at early environmental exposures and early fetal brain development, which is when it's happening. He couldn't care less. So
Oh,
so
that's
the point
very
is
interesting.
he does not care about the science
Hmm.
and instead he wants to create registries which you know of you know I mean what is this, are these registries of your mental defectives, Bobby? Is this something that was done in the early days of Nazi Germany, like the Action T4 program? It's very dark. and
Mhm.
very twisted. And, we have to stand up and say, no, we're not going to put up with that.
Thank you. Yes, exactly. And I think being here and listening to the information and being able to spread what we've learned is such an important step in that. Um, Dr. Kleinbaum, I want to circle back to you. And I know that you do a lot of work in the AI space and that you've been speaking with members of the government about that. And what are some things, how is that connected to this? And what are some things that we should know so that we can be good advocates and we can be contacting our representatives and, advocating to our communities about the connection in this and that piece to this very complicated puzzle.
Yeah, I wish I had happier news to share there. It's like the being in Washington and talking about science and artificial intelligence these days is the worst like case of like cognitive dissonance that you can imagine. Because on one hand, people associated with, I did some work with the National Security Commission for Emerging Biotechnology, and they're very concerned and focused on how we can ensure America keeps its place as a leader in biotechnology, whether that's for pharmaceuticals or agriculture, and all of this like maintain like this stronghold that we built around scientific research. And then like down the street, like budgets are being cut and scientists are being gone after. Like it's terrible. Like I think that there are people there who acknowledge the importance of this, but seem to have a lot of them have really lost the thread in terms of how we got here, what we as a country did to establish our leadership in science and scientific research. And part of it, I think, is just, there's always this push, and I hesitate to even say this word because it has been uh, so polluted, but this advocacy for like transparency in science, which like I'm all for. I don't think that's our problem. Scientists publish in peer-reviewed journals like like the science is out there. The problem is that what we actually need is, you know, more and better communication and frankly more education in science. We need like to be supporting teachers and the people who are actually, because part of the problem is like it's really easy to just like make stuff up. Like the wellness industry that Dr. Hotez is speaking about, like they are preying on people's ignorance and and our instinct as humans for like easy solutions. And
Mhm.
the science is always more complicated, more nuanced. And if you can't have that more sophisticated conversation, then it's really easy uh, to lose an argument to someone who isn't playing, isn't using the same playbook, isn't playing by the same rules.
Yeah, I mean,
Right.
DJ, the gas, and I'm sure you've seen this too. The gaslighting is amazing. I mean,
Yeah,
they're
Mhm.
saying, we're going to apply gold standard science to the agencies.
Right.
What
yeah,
BS? I mean, it's
yeah,
been nothing. They've been the quintessential gold standard science for
yeah,
decades, and now all of a sudden these grifters and it's really what they really want to do is promote their pseudoscience agenda, and that
yeah,
goes hand in hand with tearing down the academic health centers and trying to say that the academic health centers have these unsavory ties with the pharmaceutical companies, and now they want to go, Kennedy's been trying to go after the biomedical journals. And what does
Mhm.
he want to put in place? He puts these WordPress documents that are made to look like journals that have
right.
names of people on an editorial board, but it's really to create an alternative pseudoscience universe, and that's what's at stake here.
Yeah,
Wow. I think that just listening to both of you, I hope that what people walk away from is that this is such a multifaceted, developed plan that's happening. He hasn't ended up in this seat accidentally, and that there's lots of players, and this has been a long time, well constructed
Yeah,
push.
well, that's a point of our book, Science Under Siege. It's,
Mhm.
we try to emphasize it's not all about Kennedy. I mean, this is so much bigger than Kennedy. It's
Right.
a well-oiled, well-financed, politically driven ecosystem that now Kennedy is coming back into and adapting his rhetoric accordingly. And unfortunately, now he's been given a lot of power as his appointees for committees like ACIP, the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices. God knows what they're going to come up with on Thursday and Friday of this week for COVID vaccines or some of the other committees. So it's a tear down of our whole scientific infrastructure.
Thank you. I have a joint question for both of you, and I think this is going to wrap up the portion of me asking you questions, and then we'll be able to turn to some of the people that have gathered here tonight to listen to you. The First Amendment guarantees freedom of and for religion, but also the freedom from religion in our government. And that's clearly that initial push, this Project 2025, the Heritage Foundation, the far right Christian nationalism. All of these are, heads of the same beast, and the anti-science, but also a very strong line of anti-Semitism that's tied into this. So when religious extremists use their faith to restrict our rights and our freedom to practice our religion and our faith, and our freedom from their religion and faith, and they're making medical recommendations and policies regarding the efficacy of vaccines to this level, where should we be looking for the facts and for the truth, and to kind of walk together through this and keep ourselves and our families and our communities safe? To both of you, Dr. Kleinbaum, do you want to go first?
Sure. I mean, to the question of like, where do we look for facts and truth? Not to the government. I mean, that's really part of the problem. Like we're not at the point yet where scientific and medical journals are being censored, but it's not hard to imagine that they will be. And after all, I mean, we're still at a point where that coercion exists. It's just indirect because they've decided to cut funding to specific categories of research, to specific like types of medical studies that have either been, canceled or not funded. So, I unfortunately, like I wish I had a better answer to that question, but at this point, like it's getting real scary real quick.
Well, one of the things that I point out is, when you look at the world's major religions, whether it's, Christianity or, Islam or Judaism or Hinduism, there are no prohibitions really against vaccines or other mainstream aspects of technology and science. Or if there's some confusion, religious leaders have come out, like the Pope has come out and strongly endorsed science. But
for some reason, it's still not getting through that wall.
So here's the problem. And as I see it, the problem, my view is with, even though there's no, there's no issue with the science among the mainstream aspects of the religion. Within each religion, you find sects or cults or sub-elements that will use targeting science and scientists for political gain. So let me, an obvious example is, there's nothing anti-science about Islam. I mean, during the before the Middle Ages, it was Islamic scholars who kept Galen and Hippocrates and Ptolemy and all their works alive through translation. But then you get to the Taliban in Pakistan and Afghanistan assassinating polio workers, right? So that's an example. Or even in Judaism, there's certainly nothing anti-vaccines against in Judaism, but then you have small insular groups of the Haredi in New York and New Jersey who decided not to vaccinate and were anti-vaccine. I mean, I remember getting a call from Donald McNeil of the New York Times, who used to be their science reporter, and Donald's known me for years, and he knows I'm Jewish. He goes, "Hey, Peter, since when are Jews against the vaccines?" And I said, Donald, Jews aren't against the vaccines. We make the vaccines. So, Jonas Salk made the polio vaccine. So did Sabin or Stan Plotkin, the rubella vaccine. He laughed and he actually printed it. So, and the same thing with Christianity. There's nothing fundamentally, in modern times anyway, anti-science about Christianity, but you get individual that will exploit this for political gain and control. And that's kind of how I think about it.
To both of you, to your knowledge, and we can start with Dr. Hotez, is there a widespread effort within your community of scientists to work together to both combat this disinformation, and then both as Jewish men and doctors, is there a cohort of you working together or speaking to each other or uplifting each other during this specifically anti-Semitic time? That's being linked with this anti-science movement.
Yeah, it's not easy. I mean, for twofold. First of all, the research universities and the academic health centers are running scared. They tend to err on the side of trying to hunker down and be quiet in hopes that they don't get recognized. And so it's so that's been somewhat problematic
Mhm.
as well, because they're concerned that they see what's happened to Harvard and Columbia and some of the others, and they don't want to fall into this. So unfortunate. What I say is, look, I mean, this is only going to continue to grow, and it's really important that we, have some ground rules here and how to speak out and defend the scientist. Or, what too often, especially for young scientists, what you'll get is, well, you're an academic, you're free to speak out, dot, 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 but don't screw this up and don't get the institution in trouble.
Right.
And of course, if you're out there in the public domain enough, you will screw it up and you will get the institution in trouble, and you need to know you have their backing. And so the consequence of that is, too often scientists are invisible. I like to cite these surveys that Policy Group Research America does every couple of years, and they're a policy group based, very good policy group based in the DC area, and they do these surveys and they ask the American people, can you name a living scientist? Question one. Question two, can you name an institution where biomedical research is conducted?
Oh,
And so the numbers are always about the same. So they haven't really changed much. 75, three-quarters of Americans cannot name a living scientist. And when they try to, they usually mention Einstein or Jonas Salk, not realizing they've moved on. Or
right.
eventually they'll get to Neil deGrasse Tyson and Bill Nye, who are wonderful, but not so much working scientists like DJ and I are, right? Struggling over
Right.
major revisions of papers and grants that don't get discussed and what goes on in scientific meetings. So we're invisible. And then when asked about an institution where biomedical research is conducted, nobody names Carnegie Mellon or University of Pittsburgh or UPMC. Nobody names any institutions in the Texas Medical Center. So we're invisible by design. And I think the problem with that is it creates a vacuum. And that vacuum gives the bad actors a place to move in, and to portray us as shadowy figures lurking around in white coats plotting nefarious things, right? So we're not seen as people that have to, if you're younger, pick up your kids at school and pay bills and do all the things that people do. So they
Mhm.
dehumanize us, and unfortunately, that's by design. And unfortunately, the academic health centers and the research universities more often than not are complicit with that, because they're so obsessed with hunkering down or controlling the brand of the institution that they don't realize what's happening to them.
Thank you.
And then on the anti-Semitism side, I've started to speak out a lot about, going to area synagogues. So, we have a pretty robust Jewish community here in Houston, very old Jewish community. So I've spoken about 5 or 6 shuls here, and then I spoke to the Jewish Federation of San Antonio to explain that link. And there it gets sort of hard to talk about also, because, the whole stuff with Gaza and the Palestinians is so dominant. And that's not
Right.
really what I'm talking about, trying to connect that link between anti-science and anti-Semitism. I'm not a
Well,
Middle East scholar. I'm not an expert in any of that. So I try to kind of stay in my lane and talk about how I got into it through the links between anti-science, anti-Sem. But that's
right.
also sometimes misunderstood on both sides of that issue.
Right. And I think that that leads perfectly into my last question for Dr. Kleinbaum. And then I have one, I think, overreaching that we've heard a lot from the chat that I'm going to follow up with. So Dr. Kleinbaum, what is it specifically about your Jewish faith that connects you to this topic and to being pro-science in this moment? And how did those two streets meet for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I consider myself very lucky. Like I grew up in a, small, like fantastic Jewish community. And so I think it was that sense of community that is sort of the tie that binds, the religious uh, upbringing I had with my work as a scientist, because not just like the scientific community as a whole, but also when it comes to a lot of the things we've been talking about here with regards to vaccines, like it's the acknowledgement that we're all in this together.
Mhm.
Like we're not as much as current aspects of this administration would like to isolate people and have everyone believe that everyone's out on their homestead with their guns. Like this is a society, this is a community, and a lot of the benefits that you get from the advances in medical research are things that we we reap that as a whole, not like it doesn't like it's not about the one individual, it's about the impact that can have on an entire community of people who for various reasons are not able to get vaccines. If we get herd immunity, if enough people get them, then all of those people can be protected as well. So it's that sense of we're all in this together that binds science and my upbringing in the Jewish community together.
Thank you. I think that was very well said. There has just been an overwhelming response in the chat of just attributes to you both for being here and speaking about this so blatantly and giving us so much vital information. And one of the consistently brought up questions was that everyone is in different states, and because we've had also this push for states' rights, people are having very different experiences about accessing healthcare and specifically accessing the COVID vaccine. Do you, we'll start with Dr. Hotez, have some guidance for us on what we can do to protect ourselves? Here in Pennsylvania, you can't currently get it. And I'm desperate for it, as I know a lot
Yeah, so I think,
of
and we'll see what happens at ACIP Thursday and Friday. I mean, God forbid they really put out some wackadoodle pseudoscience, more wackadoodle pseudoscience, and restrict vaccines even further. So I actually went and got a COVID immunization last night, even though it's probably sooner than I wanted to, because I didn't know if it's going to be around, in a couple of days. So,
right.
but so what's going to happen? Well, I don't know. I mean, it's so unprecedented. My concern is, well, what may have to happen is there's already discussion now with coalitions of states getting together to defy the recommendations. So
Okay.
there's a Western coalition in California, Washington State, and Oregon that's looking to create their own recommendations. Then you have the American Academy of Pediatrics issuing their recommendations, which are different from what's being put out by Department of Health and Human Services. I've heard the same from New York State, Massachusetts, and New Jersey. So it's the wild, I shouldn't say the Wild West. It's the Wild West and the Wild East out there
Right.
because there isn't that really. We've always trusted, right, the federal government and the Health and Human Services agencies. They've always worked hard to be apolitical, but now you've got this whole pseudoscience empire forming. And so I don't know that's a very long, I don't know the answer to your question answer. But I think that's what, and then also let's say the states are at variance with some of this, with CDC recommendations or ACIP recommendations.
Hmm.
How does that work? And because a lot of these pharmacy chains are national, so when CVS is deciding, when to release the vaccines and when to make them available and what's the guidance, it was always based on CDC. Do they now follow the individual states or do they follow CDC? Same with the insurance company. So I don't think we know until we know, and it may take time to sort out.
Thank you. Should we bring our masks back out? I'm
Well,
always
right
like,
now there's a lot of
mask time.
transmission. There's a lot of transmission going on right now, which is one of the reasons why I'd actually gotten another immunization over the summer, so I felt pretty good that I didn't have to rush out and get it right away. I could have waited a couple of more months, but then when I saw what might happen in ACIP, I said, it might not be available at all. So I went and got it last night, probably sooner than I want. So somebody writes, I trust the Infectious Disease Society of America. Yeah, I do too. And American College of Physicians, American Academy of Pediatrics. These are, I have a lot of links to all those organizations. They're amazing. And so, yes, but it's caveat emptor, right? I mean, it's
Right.
now, who wants that where a parent or an individual has got to start scrolling through the IDSA, American College of Physicians, American Academy of Pediatric website to make you figure out what you're supposed to do. And by the way, the docs are the same thing because they're trying to figure it out as well. So
Mm-hmm.
it creates a lot of instability, uncertainty, which I also think is by design.
Correct.
That's the definition of propaganda. It's not necessarily to make you believe the lies. It's to make it so you don't know what to believe, and that's how propaganda operates, and that's what's going on right now in Health and Human Services.
Right. Thank you. So finally, just to close up and wrap this up for both of you, and we'll start with Dr. Kleinbaum. What are some of the most effective actions everyday people can be taking, especially the Jewish women that are gathered here today and the women that have brought this to you here in Pittsburgh and across the country, that we can defend scientific truth, protect religious freedom, and ensure equal access to healthcare for all in our communities?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the answer that I have here is beyond even vaccines and healthcare. It's just in general, like this idea of like remembering that like we're a society, we're a community, and we are all in this together. There are organizations that are trying to like push those like tie those like bounds of community together. There's a Beacon for Democracy, which has organized people to get together on Thursdays to, have like very positive signs and like being out there and being outspoken. That's what we've seen has worked. I'm far from an expert on things like what's going on with ICE and immigration, but if you look at the examples of communities that have had, members of their community disappeared, like the people coming together and demanding their release has what has actually helped. So I think that there's a version of that that we can be doing as scientists, as medical professionals to come together because making sure that those voices are heard and that we are all bound together as much as people are trying to drive us apart. That's the important thing in all of this.
Yes, and I think that's such an important comment to reflect on as we're going into some of these high holy days that call us to reflect on who we are and how we contribute to society and to our community. And I think that was perfect. Thank you so much. Dr. Hotez, do you have any final thoughts for us?
Yeah, so Ann and I just celebrated our 38th wedding anniversary over the weekend,
Congratulations.
and how she's put up with me for 38 years, who knows? But I think the message for me is, listen to the smart Jewish ladies. They know what they're doing. My wife's a Smith College graduate, and so was her mother and sister and aunt. So Jews from Smith College, and I'll tell you a story. How important that is. So early on in the pandemic, if you remember, everybody was at home, so I wasn't even here in the office. I was actually at the
Mhm.
corner of my bedroom with the laptop and on CNN and MSNBC. And I remember when all this garbage came out about hydroxychloroquine, and I didn't know what to do. So what people don't know is on the other side of the laptop on the sofa was sitting Ann, sometimes listening, sometimes not. And I said, and I'll never forget it. She was sitting there after I did one interview. I said, "Well, Ann, this is bullshit. I mean, all this stuff about hydroxychloroquine, it does nothing. It doesn't even make sense. People are going to
Mhm.
die." And usually, Ann is the one who kind of keeps me grounded and prevents me from being a little too glib or a little too untethered. And this time she did something that she's never done before. She said, "This is your moment to speak out. You do not want to deal with this a year from now and realize that you could have saved lives, but you didn't." And
Right. Right. Thank you. That
that's
was
what I
beautiful.
needed to hear. So listen to the smart Jewish ladies.
Thank you. I like that. I'll echo that from the rooftops. I'll write it down for my husband. Thank you all so much. We are just a little bit over time, but please fill out your surveys. Tonight we've heard how religious extremism is being used to attack science, public health, and equality. We've seen the threats to women, girls, LGBTQA+ people, and marginalized communities. And we've also seen how strong the fight for facts can be when we go to the experts. The First Amendment guarantees freedom of and for religion, but also freedom from religion in our government. Science is a Jewish value, and our tradition teaches us to protect life, justice, and the rights of all people in a pluralistic democracy. As Jewish women, as Pittsburghers, as Americans, and as people who believe in truth, we can stand strong together, defending science, defending freedom, and defending each other. Please join me in a huge thank you to Dr. Peter Hotez and Dr. Kleinbaum for their powerful insights tonight, their time, their wisdom, their humanity, and thank you all for being part of this urgent fight for facts. Being here is important. Don't let the conversation die here. Take it back to your dinner tables, take it back to your communities, take it to your card clubs. We have to spread the word. You're walking away with two authorities tonight, Dr. Kleinbaum and Dr. Peter Hotez. So when you need to look for facts, you can Google their names, see who they're working with, see what they're publishing, see what they're sharing. You have two roots of truth now to build on. Thank you again so much. Please complete the survey. Thank you to our grant sponsors, our co-sponsors, our panelists, our participants. Please follow us, Jews for a Secular Democracy. We do programming nationwide. We bring you lots of programs like this that give you facts and bring you right to the authorities about them. We have some in-person events happening in Pittsburgh. We will send that all out to you. We hope to see you all soon. Thank you, thank you, thank you.